He didn't lower his voice, he didn't step back, and he didn't ask permission. In front of a full courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, officers, and spectators, the chief of police pointed at Judge Caprio and declared him under arrest. Bailiffs froze, court staff panicked, and two uniformed officers started moving toward the bench. But what happened next wasn't just a reversal of power, it was a masterclass in what real authority looks like, and the moment that made the chief regret everything. Before we show you exactly what happened inside that courtroom, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to hit subscribe with the bell icon on so you don't miss a single one of our daily stories. Now let's get into it. It was just another gray morning in Providence Municipal Court. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Not a downpour, just that steady Rhode Island drizzle that makes everything feel a little heavier. People filed in with coffee cups and tired eyes, most of them expecting the usual Tuesday lineup, traffic violations, overdue registration fines, maybe a noise complaint or two. Nothing that would make the evening news. Nothing that would change anything. Judge Frank Caprio took his seat at the bench, same as he had thousands of times before. At 77, he'd seen just about everything a municipal courtroom could throw at him. But there was something about this morning, a tension in the air maybe, or just the way his clerk leaned in a little closer than usual when she handed him the docket. "Judge," she said quietly, "the next case involves a high-profile defendant." "Just thought you should know." Caprio adjusted his glasses and looked up at her with those kind eyes that had made him beloved across the country. "This court treats everyone the same," he said simply. "Call the case." The bailiff's voice cut through the low murmur of the gallery like a bell. "The state of Rhode Island versus Chief Samuel DeLuca." The room went dead silent. Not quiet, silent. Even the people flipping through their phones looked up, because everyone in Providence knew that name. Chief DeLuca had been appointed 8 years ago after the department went through a rough patch. Scandals, public distrust, the whole mess. He came in as the fixer, aggressive, no nonsense, old school in every sense of the word. The kind of guy who didn't smile often, and when he did, it never quite reached his eyes. And the gallery? Packed. Not just with the usual court regulars either. Third row back sat Julian Webb, the city inspector whose name was on the citation. 48 years old, graying at the temples, wearing a brown jacket that had seen better days. He looked like a man who'd been told 100 times to let it go, and hadn't. Next to him sat 3 other city employees, their faces tight, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from watching your colleague take on City Hall. Across the aisle, near the windows, a cluster of off-duty officers had gathered, not in uniform, but you could tell, the posture, the way they watched the doors. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked curious, none of them looked like they wanted to be recognized. And in the very back corner, almost hidden behind a support column, sat a woman in her early 60s with a leather-bound notebook open on her lap. Margaret Solis, retired courthouse clerk. 32 years she'd worked these halls before stepping down last spring. Word was she'd seen more cover-ups and backroom deals than anyone still employed by the city. And now she was here, pen in hand, watching. And now here he was, stepping through those courtroom doors in full dress uniform, navy jacket with commendation ribbons running down the chest, gold badge catching the fluorescent light, boots clicking against the tile floor. He didn't walk like a defendant. He walked like he owned the building. 2 lawyers in expensive suits followed behind him, one carrying a leather briefcase, the other whispering something urgent in his ear. DeLuca barely acknowledged them. His eyes were locked on the bench. And when he locked eyes with Judge Caprio, he didn't nod, didn't greet, just stood there. Chin lifted, posture stiff. Caprio's voice stayed calm. "Good morning, Chief. Please step forward." DeLuca didn't move right away. Just a half-beat pause, long enough that everyone noticed. Then, slowly he walked to the defendant's table. His attorneys flanked him on either side, nervous energy radiating off them like heat. He didn't look humbled. He looked angry. The prosecutor stood up. Assistant District Attorney Claire Mendoza, mid-40s, sharp as a tack, with a single sheet of paper in her hand, and an edge to her voice that said she knew exactly what kind of fight this was going to be. Your Honor, she began. Chief Samuel DeLuca is charged with a misdemeanor violation of Municipal Traffic Code 14-3.1, unauthorized use of a designated handicap parking space, and Municipal Ordinance 2217, subsection B, verbal harassment of a public employee performing official duties. On paper, it didn't sound like much, but the way people shifted in their seats said otherwise. Caprio glanced down at the file in front of him. Go on. The incident occurred over several weeks, Mendoza continued. According to verified reports, Chief DeLuca repeatedly used a handicapped parking space outside his private gym in the downtown district. He doesn't have a state-issued placard or medical exemption on file. City Inspector Julian Webb cited him twice. Both citations were dismissed internally by police department clerks without judicial review. A few heads turned in the gallery. DeLuca's legal team remained perfectly still. Mendoza kept going. 3 weeks ago, Inspector Webb attempted to issue a third citation in person. At that point, Chief DeLuca approached him and said, and I'm quoting from the inspector's report, "That citation's going to vanish like the other two. Don't make this difficult. You're wasting your time." Caprio's fingers tapped gently on the bench, that little tell he had when something caught his attention. A second witness was present, Mendoza added. Off-duty patrol officer Elena Rowe. She was in the parking lot at the time and later reported the incident to Internal Affairs. Before she could say more, DeLuca raised his hand slightly and spoke without looking at her. Petty nonsense. The words fell flat but loud enough to carry. This is why morale's in the toilet, he continued. We've got real crimes happening, and the city wants to put on a show over a parking space. His lead attorney, a graying man named Leon Baxter, touched his elbow. Chief, he whispered. DeLuca shrugged him off. I've been parked in that spot since the department assigned me to this district. Not one complaint in 8 years. Now suddenly it's harassment? Because one clipboard carrier got his feelings hurt? Caprio didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Chief DeLuca, you'll have an opportunity to respond after the state is finished. Please allow Ms. Mendoza to continue. DeLuca didn't reply, but his jaw clenched tight, and his hand rested on his duty belt. Not threatening, just there. A small gesture, a reminder maybe of where he came from, of what he thought still mattered. But inside this courtroom, Judge Caprio wasn't a press target or a junior official. He was the law, and everyone in that room could feel the line being drawn. The tension hadn't let up. If anything, it had thickened, like a storm cloud hanging low enough that you could feel the electricity, but couldn't tell when the lightning would hit. Judge Caprio turned a page and looked up. Chief DeLuca, the state has presented the basic facts. Before we proceed with witnesses, I need a formal plea. How do you plead to these charges? DeLuca didn't stand, didn't even blink. Instead, with a dry laugh that seemed entirely out of place, he said, Your Honor, with respect, I don't recognize the legitimacy of this proceeding. A few murmurs rose from the back. Caprio held his gaze, unmoved. You'll have to clarify that for the record. DeLuca leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. This is a political stunt. A city inspector with a grudge. A prosecutor looking to climb the ladder. I've served this city longer than anyone in this room. I don't park in that spot because I'm reckless. I park there because I'm working 16-hour days cleaning up everyone else's mess. If you think this deserves a courtroom, then the problem isn't me. It's the people pulling your strings. Caprio's tone didn't waver. Chief, this is not a debate. It's a legal proceeding. Are you entering a plea of not guilty? Again, no direct answer. Instead, DeLuca turned toward the gallery like he was addressing a press briefing. I've seen that criminals walk free in this courtroom over worse. I've had my officers testify here and watch their integrity questioned for doing their jobs. And now, suddenly, I'm on trial for a parking space? He turned back to the bench. This isn't about justice. It's about headlines. Caprio's voice sharpened just slightly. Chief, this is a court of law, not a press conference. You may not believe in the charges, but you will respect the process. A small smirk tugged at the corner of DeLuca's mouth. He turned to his attorneys, completely ignoring the bench now, and muttered, "We'll see about that." The courtroom went still again. Not silent, still. The kind of stillness where you're holding your breath without realizing it. Caprio turned to the prosecution. "Does the state have a witness prepared?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mendoza said, standing. "The state calls Officer Elena Rowe to the stand." Before she could take a step, DeLuca's second attorney, a younger man named Gilman, shot to his feet. "Objection? Relevance?" Caprio raised an eyebrow. "The officer submitted a report. She's on record as a witness to the primary incident." "We believe her testimony will be biased," Gilman said quickly. "Noted," Caprio replied. "Objection overruled. Officer Rowe, please approach the stand." As the young officer made her way forward, all eyes shifted to her, but DeLuca didn't turn. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, tapping his fingers on the table in a steady rhythm, like he was trying to keep a fuse from burning all the way down. Officer Elena Rowe took the stand with the kind of quiet composure that said she didn't want to be here, but she wasn't going to lie either. Early 30s, uniform crisp, posture steady, she gave off the air of someone who'd thought long and hard about this moment. Judge Caprio greeted her with a nod. "Thank you for your service, Officer Rowe. Please state your name and rank for the record." "Elena Rowe, Patrol Officer, Providence PD, Badge 7162. "Proceed," Caprio said, turning toward the prosecution. Mendoza stood. "Officer Rowe, did you witness the incident involving Chief DeLuca and City Inspector Julian Webb on the date in question?" "Yes, ma'am. I was off duty, finishing a workout at the gym. I exited through the side parking lot just as the confrontation began." "And what did you observe?" Rowe didn't look at DeLuca. She looked forward toward the judge. "I saw Chief DeLuca parked in a handicapped spot. Inspector Webb was writing a citation and placing it under the wiper. The chief exited his vehicle and said, quote, 'You must be new. That citation's not going anywhere. I'd hate to have to remind you how this city works.'" A low murmur stirred through the gallery. From the third row, Julian Webb shifted in his seat. His hands gripped the armrest. This was the first time he'd heard someone else say it out loud. Confirm what he'd been told was just a misunderstanding. Just him being overly sensitive. Just the way things worked. Rowe kept going, calm but firm. Inspector Webb remained polite. He explained the citation was legally valid. Chief DeLuca then stepped closer and said, quote, "This is how little things become big problems. I suggest you walk away." "Did the inspector walk away?" Mendoza asked. "No, he stayed and completed the citation. After that, the chief walked to his car, crumpled the ticket, and drove off." Mendoza nodded slowly. "Officer Rowe, was this the first time you observed Chief DeLuca using that space?" "No, ma'am. I've seen his vehicle there multiple times over the past year. Always in that same spot. I assumed he had a placard until I noticed he never displayed one." Mendoza took a breath. "Officer Rowe, in your time working under Chief DeLuca's command, have you witnessed other instances where department protocol was selectively applied?" Rowe's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am. There was an incident last year involving a deputy chief's son, DUI arrest, evidence mishandled, case dismissed. Another involving unauthorized use of department vehicles for personal trips. Both were flagged internally. Both disappeared from the system within 48 hours. At the defense table, Attorney Leon Baxter leaned over and whispered something urgent to DeLuca. The chief waved him off without looking. Mendoza took a breath. "Has the chief ever instructed you, formally or informally, to disregard certain parking violations or internal citations?" Rowe hesitated for just half a second, the kind of pause that told the whole courtroom the answer mattered. "Yes," she said. "He's made it clear that certain citations, especially those involving senior officers, were to be handled discreetly or passed along to internal channels for dismissal." At the defense table, DeLuca shifted, his hands curled into fists against the table. Caprio leaned forward. "Officer Rowe, are you saying there exists an informal policy of selective enforcement for department leadership?" Rowe nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. It's not written down, but it's understood. Before Mendoza could say another word, DeLuca cut in, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is career suicide, officer." The room froze. Rowe didn't flinch. Caprio turned his head slowly toward the defense table, and when he spoke, his voice had turned to ice. "Chief DeLuca, that will be your final warning." DeLuca leaned back in his chair, smirking. He didn't apologize, didn't even blink, just folded his arms as if daring the court to do something about it. And for the first time that morning, everyone in that courtroom began to realize this wasn't just about a parking ticket. This was about a man who'd never been told no. The silence after Officer Rowe's testimony wasn't the calm kind. It was brittle, the kind that sits in your bones and waits to break. Judge Caprio looked over his glasses at Chief DeLuca. "Chief, you now have the opportunity to respond to the witness's statement." DeLuca stood, but he didn't speak, not right away. He adjusted his collar, straightened the crease on his sleeves, and then slowly turned to face the judge. "Judge," he began, voice measured but full of fire. "This hearing is over." Caprio blinked. "I beg your pardon?" DeLuca stepped forward from behind the defense table, ignoring his lawyers who both reached out to stop him at the same time. He pulled something from his inside jacket pocket. Not a weapon, but a printed legal document sealed in a plastic sleeve. "I am invoking departmental protocol under Rhode Island Statute 1371, subsection C, authorizing the chief of police to intervene in unlawful judicial interference with active law enforcement operations." Caprio frowned. "Chief, that statute applies to emergency field operations, not court proceedings." DeLuca's voice rose, booming now. "Your Honor, you are obstructing a law enforcement process. You've overstepped your authority. You've allowed a disgruntled junior officer to malign my leadership in a public forum under questionable legality. And as chief of police," he paused, looked the judge squarely in the eye, "I'm placing you under arrest." Gasps swept through the courtroom like a wave. Caprio didn't move, didn't even blink. DeLuca turned toward the back of the room and raised his hand. "Officers." Two uniformed officers stood up from the gallery. No one had noticed them before. They weren't bailiffs, they weren't courthouse security, they were Providence PD. Real officers, armed, clearly stationed there for this exact moment. DeLuca gestured to them. "Take the judge into custody." The officers didn't move. One of them glanced at the other, waiting for a cue, but neither stepped forward. Caprio remained seated, hands resting gently on the bench. When he spoke, his voice was steady. Not angry, not loud, but laced with warning. "Chief, I strongly recommend you think very carefully about what you're doing." DeLuca didn't hesitate. "You've stepped outside your role. You're interfering with internal department discipline. This entire proceeding is illegitimate, and it ends now." He turned to the officers again. "That's a direct order. Take him in." Still, they didn't move. One of them, Officer Vega, finally spoke. "Chief, this isn't lawful." DeLuca spun toward him, rage flashing in his eyes. "That's an order." The room went still. From the back, one of the off-duty officers in civilian clothes stood up. Sergeant Marcus Hall, 22 years on the force. He'd served under 3 different chiefs. He looked at Vega, then at DeLuca, then at the judge. His voice cut through the tension, steady and clear. "Chief, stand down." DeLuca's head snapped toward him. "You don't have the authority." "Neither do you," Hall said simply. "Not here, not like this." Another off-duty officer stood, then another, not moving toward anyone, not taking sides, just standing, a silent refusal to let this go any further. In the third row, Julian Webb had gone pale. His hands were shaking. One of his colleagues gripped his shoulder, steadying him. Margaret Solis, the retired clerk in the back, kept writing. Her pen hadn't stopped moving since DeLuca had said the word arrest. Then from the corner, a voice cut through. The bailiff spoke into his radio. "Security, I need courthouse command, immediately." Everyone was watching the same thing now. A man in uniform standing tall, loud, and absolutely alone, because the room and the law were already rising around him. "Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Think about the people in your life who've stood up to authority when it mattered, the ones who told the truth even when it cost them something. drop their story in the comments below. Because what you're about to see next, it's not just about one courtroom. It's about every moment someone chooses courage over comfort. And those stories matter. The rear doors of the courtroom opened, and two members of the courthouse security detail stepped in. They didn't belong to the police department. They answered to the judiciary, not to the chief. Leading them was Captain Harriet Walsh, a composed woman in her 50s with a direct gaze and the kind of calm that mirrored Caprio's. She surveyed the room, walked briskly to the well of the court, and turned to the bailiff. "Report," she said softly. The bailiff nodded toward DeLuca. "Attempted arrest of the judge. Officers refused. Court proceedings disrupted." Captain Walsh turned to DeLuca, who stood with his arms crossed, lips curled. "Chief DeLuca, are you attempting to detain a sitting judge in the middle of an active courtroom session?" DeLuca didn't hesitate. "That's right. The judge is obstructing a departmental issue and weaponizing witness testimony." Caprio still hadn't risen from the bench. "Captain Walsh, please ensure the officers present for Chief DeLuca are safely escorted from the premises. They are not under subpoena and are not members of court security." The two uniformed officers who had stood moments earlier looked between the chief and the captain. One of them, the one who'd refused the order, gave a quiet nod. "We'll go," he said. "We were told we might be needed for departmental protocol, but this isn't that." Captain Walsh gestured to the door. The officers exited without another word. They didn't even glance back at DeLuca. Now the courtroom belonged entirely to the judiciary. DeLuca stood alone. His attorney leaned in, voice barely audible. "Sam, you have to stop. This is not winnable. Stop talking." But DeLuca shook his head. "If the courts won't hold the line, the police will. That's what nobody in this city understands anymore. We don't need more judges. We need order." Mendoza stood and conferred with a court officer for a moment, then approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state requests immediate contempt proceedings based on direct and overt disruption of judicial process and attempted unlawful interference." Caprio looked down at his notes for a moment, then back up. "I will allow 10 minutes for both legal teams to prepare. This court will recess briefly. Upon return, we will hear arguments for contempt." That's when DeLuca snapped. "You don't recess me," he shouted, slamming a fist down on the defense table. "I outrank this entire building. You think a black robe makes you untouchable?" His voice echoed through the room. Two security officers stepped forward, slow but deliberate. Caprio remained calm. "Chief, sit down." DeLuca didn't move. He stood his ground, breathing heavy, red-faced, eyes darting between everyone, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to agree with him. No one did, because by now, everyone in that room could see what was happening. Power wasn't being abused anymore. It was being peeled away. When court resumed 10 minutes later, the room felt tighter, like something had snapped but hadn't quite settled yet. People spoke in whispers, but no one left. No one even looked away. It wasn't about traffic violations anymore. Everyone understood that. This was about power, and what happens when someone forgets where theirs ends. Judge Caprio returned to the bench with a thin folder in his hand. No stack of papers, no binder, just a few measured documents and the weight of a career built on calm authority. "Court is now back in session, Juan, he said. "We are here to hear arguments related to contempt proceedings against Chief Samuel DeLuca." Mendoza stood. "Your Honor, the state seeks contempt on the following grounds: direct disruption of judicial proceedings, verbal intimidation of a sworn officer, attempted unlawful arrest of a judge during active session, and obstruction of court operations by improperly deploying subordinate officers." She handed a printed motion to the bailiff, who passed it to Caprio. Caprio glanced at it briefly, then turned toward the defense. "Mr. Baxter?" DeLuca's senior counsel stood but didn't walk forward. His voice was measured, almost defeated. "Your Honor, the defense will not contest the factual summary of events. We do not dispute that the chief spoke out of turn. However, we ask the court to consider the psychological toll of the position he holds, the burdens, the expectations." Caprio didn't respond immediately. He looked at DeLuca directly. "Chief, this is your opportunity. Before I proceed with sanctions. You may address the court and correct the record. You may retract your attempt to arrest a sitting judge, and you may apologize to the officers you attempted to command. There was a long pause. DeLuca sat still, jaw working, like he was biting down on the words forming inside him. Then finally, predictably, he said, "I don't answer to judges. I command law enforcement." No apology, no reflection, just that same old fist clenched against the world. Mr. Baxter buried his face in his hands. Caprio didn't blink. He reached for the gavel, not to slam it, just to hold it. "Very well," he said softly. "Bailiffs, please escort Chief DeLuca into holding." No raised voice, no drama, just the quiet dignity of a system reasserting itself. This time, the bailiffs didn't hesitate. They walked toward DeLuca with the certainty of men no longer confused about who was in charge. And as they reached him, he stood but didn't resist. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. For the first time since walking into that room, he looked still. As the cuffs were fastened, the courtroom remained silent. And in that silence, justice didn't feel loud. It felt inevitable. When the double doors closed behind Chief DeLuca, cuffed and silent, the room stayed frozen. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't even relief. It was awe. There's a rare kind of silence that falls when people know they've witnessed something historic, something that doesn't get reversed or edited out or forgotten. This was one of those moments. The courtroom didn't exhale until Judge Caprio did. He set his gavel down gently and looked over the gallery. "I understand what many of you are feeling," he said, voice quiet but certain. "You came here for traffic hearings. You didn't expect to see this, neither did I. But what you saw today wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't about punishment. It was about a principle that holds this entire system together: accountability." His eyes moved across the room, resting momentarily on Officer Rowe. She was still seated near the witness stand, hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Her composure had carried her through testimony, but now her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were glossy, not from fear, but from the emotional cost of having spoken up and been believed. Caprio motioned gently. "Officer Rowe?" "Thank you." She nodded once, barely. Caprio looked to the clerk. "Please note for the record that the witness's statement was integral in establishing the truth of this proceeding. Further, I request an official commendation recommendation be submitted to the department on her behalf." The clerk nodded. Mendoza stood. "Your Honor, the state also requests emergency protective status for Officer Rowe and Inspector Webb, given the nature of the defendant's former authority." "Granted," Caprio said. "Expedited review and immediate interim protections." A buzz moved through the gallery, people trying to quietly absorb the fact that a sitting police chief had just been arrested. Not by force, but by failure. He hadn't been dragged out. He'd simply lost. And in losing, he'd reminded everyone why the system needs boundaries, even for those who think they built it. The judge turned toward the prosecution table once more. "The court acknowledges that this incident has caused disruption not only within these walls, but across departments. I am instructing the Office of Court Administration to review internal security protocol for high-ranking defendants, including courtroom attendance by outside officers. This was a breach, not of security, but of expectation. And we cannot afford to misplace either." Officer Rowe stepped down and returned to her seat near the back. No one clapped, no one dared, but a few people, quietly, sincerely, nodded to her as she passed. And in that subtle acknowledgement was something far greater than applause. It was solidarity. A witness had stood up, a system had held its ground, and for once, justice hadn't needed to raise its voice. It had simply stood taller. By the time the courtroom cleared, the news had already escaped the building. Someone in the gallery had quietly sent a text. Another had taken a discreet photo as Chief DeLuca was led through the side hallway, cuffed, head high but shoulders slumped. Within the hour, the image was circulating online. By lunchtime, the headline had broken across Providence like a lightning strike. "Police chief attempts to arrest sitting judge. Is detained in stunning courtroom turnaround." Inside City Hall, the mayor's office lit up with urgent messages. By mid-afternoon, an emergency session had been called with the city council. Every department head was summoned. Even the governor's legal team requested a briefing. There were two immediate questions. Was the chief acting under any official capacity? And if not, What happened to the checks that should have stopped him? The short answer to both, no one knew. Internal affairs within the police department launched a separate investigation by nightfall. Their focus wasn't just on DeLuca's behavior. It was broader now. What had been tolerated? Who had covered for him? How long had discretionary citation handling been an open secret? The two uniformed officers who had refused DeLuca's order earlier that morning submitted written statements. Both confirmed that DeLuca had prepped them to possibly intervene if the courtroom got out of hand. One officer noted that DeLuca mentioned judicial overreach before they even stepped into the gallery. But most damning of all was the uniformed silence from the rank and file. No statements defending him, no one speaking to the press. The police union released a generic line about respecting judicial outcomes. But it was clear the department had seen the footage, and no one wanted to go down with the ship. Within 24 hours, the mayor's office issued a public statement. We are shocked and deeply disturbed by the events that took place in municipal court today. The city of Providence affirms its full support of judicial independence and rejects any abuse of power that undermines public trust. They didn't say his name. They didn't need to. Back in the community, the reaction was mixed, not politically, but emotionally. Some were stunned that a police chief could fall so hard, so publicly. Others were angry that it had taken this long. But the overwhelming reaction? Relief. Not because the judge had won, not because someone powerful had been brought down, but because for once someone had drawn the line, and the line had held. The next morning, the courtroom looked different. Not because of who sat in it, but because of what had already been decided there. No cameras were allowed, no reporters, just the people who mattered. The judge, the attorneys, the officers, and the man whose name had been echoing through every hallway of city government for the past 24 hours. Samuel DeLuca entered through the public door, not the side one reserved for officials. No badge, no uniform, just a plain gray suit, collar slightly wrinkled, and eyes that had seen the cost of his own choices. He didn't speak as he sat beside his counsel. He didn't need to. The entire courtroom could read the silence on him like a headline. Judge Caprio entered a few minutes later. Same calm posture, same composed presence, but his words carried a different kind of weight. Before this court today is the matter of Chief Samuel DeLuca, charged with contempt of court, attempted unlawful arrest of a judicial officer, obstruction of legal process, and witness intimidation. He paused. The facts are not in dispute. The defense has acknowledged the conduct. The state has submitted clear evidence. This court now renders its sentence. He looked directly at DeLuca, who raised his chin slightly but said nothing. This courtroom, Caprio continued, is not a stage. It is not a theater for personal drama or political showmanship. It exists for one purpose: to ensure that the law applies equally, regardless of uniform, title, or pride. The room was silent. For the charges before me, the sentence is as follows: 30-day suspended sentence for contempt, 250 hours of mandatory community service to be completed within 12 months, mandatory completion of ethics retraining through the Rhode Island Law Enforcement Academy, 1-year prohibition from holding any administrative command within law enforcement, and formal referral to the Office of the Attorney General and the Mayor for administrative review of employment status. No gasps this time, just solemn stillness. Caprio leaned forward slightly. Your actions placed officers in impossible positions. You undermined public trust, and you mistook command for control. That is not leadership. That is ego. DeLuca blinked but said nothing. Caprio continued, softer now. You have built a career on enforcement, but authority isn't about force. It's about restraint. The day you walked into this courtroom, you had a chance to stand accountable. Instead, you chose spectacle. And in doing so, you reminded us all why these walls matter. He set down the paper in front of him. This sentence is not designed to humiliate. It's designed to restore balance and to remind every person in this room, including myself. That power without humility is a threat to the very justice we swear to uphold. He nodded once. Court is adjourned. The gavel tapped, not loud, just final. 3 months passed. The news cycle moved on. Other headlines replaced the courtroom chaos. But inside Providence, especially within City Hall and the police department, the shadow of that day still lingered. Samuel DeLuca officially resigned from his post 2 weeks after the ethics retraining was completed. The mayor accepted the resignation in the city's best interest, and the attorney general declined to pursue further charges, citing the thoroughness of the court's resolution. Most expected that to be the last of him. But one morning, just as Judge Caprio was finishing up a quiet day of hearings, his clerk passed him a small note. Chief DeLuca requests 5 minutes, no cameras, no press, alone if possible. Caprio stared at the message for a moment, then nodded. 10 minutes later, DeLuca stepped into the judge's chambers. He looked older, not in years, but in energy, like someone who'd been carrying weight too long and finally stopped pretending it wasn't heavy. He stood just inside the doorway, hat in his hands. "Your Honor," he said. "Thank you for seeing me." Caprio motioned to a chair but didn't speak. DeLuca sat slowly. He looked around the room. The books, the plaques, the framed photos of family and community service. Then finally, he looked at Caprio. "I was wrong," he said. The words weren't rehearsed. They didn't sound like a press statement, just a man with his armor off. "I spent 30 years thinking control was strength, that authority meant never showing weakness. I thought people respected you more when they feared you." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know when that got baked into me, but it did, and it ruined a lot more than my job." Caprio leaned back in his chair, eyes unreadable. DeLuca continued, "That courtroom, the day you didn't raise your voice, the way those officers refused my order, it broke something in me, but maybe it needed breaking." A long pause passed between them. Then DeLuca asked quietly, "Do you hate me?" Caprio's expression didn't change, but his voice softened. "No." He let the words settle. "I don't hate men who fall, Nem. I worry about men who don't know they can." DeLuca exhaled, something between a sigh and a confession. "I'm trying to learn what accountability feels like, when you're the one who has to carry it." Caprio nodded. "Good. Start there." The former chief stood, thanked him, and quietly left the room. No cameras, no applause, no press release. Just a man finally learning that respect isn't something you demand in a courtroom. It's something you earn after you leave it. So here's what I want to know. What do you think would have happened if those two officers had followed the chief's order? Do you believe someone can come back from a fall like this? And if you were in that courtroom, what would you remember most? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss a story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Our other stories should be appearing on your screen now. Watch them next, and I'll see you tomorrow at the same time with a brand new video. This script is not verified and may or may not be true.